All right, hello everybody. Welcome to class 2, the sequel. Hopefully we'll get through it this time and everything will work appropriately. As we're going through, please give me the sad faces if the screen disappears. If I see a bunch of them, I'll try to do something, but if it's just a few of you, given last week's experience, I'd appreciate it if you try re-entering if it's just a couple of you here and there. So, all right, so I'm going to start moving forward here. All right, so this is what we'll be covering today. And for those of you should be able to, if you have trouble seeing the screen in front, there are a couple screens in back that will be closer to you that you can turn around and see them. Hopefully everybody will be able to see clearly what's in front here. But so today will be the first couple topics we talked about last week, but we'll talk about keeping in touch. Then we'll start talking about the MRE API, then start delving into the API, some user and actors, talk about a typical MRE flow, and then go through the code for those examples that I went ahead and showed last week, and then have a wrap up at the end. Okay, again, for keeping in touch, we're using the community Discord, the MRE community Discord. This is developer.altvr.com. If you want to go there, look for the community Discord in there. We have a intro to MREs channel inside of there. One other thing I wanted to mention, I mentioned this in that intro to MREs channel that I just talked about, but I'll be thinking of final projects for the class. What I'd like to do, originally I was thinking we could use the final class, you know, the sixth one, as an opportunity for people to show their MREs. With this many people, of course, that's really not going to work. I don't know how many people will actually go through and come up with an MRE at the end, but I'd love it if there are quite a few of you. So what I want to do is kind of hold a series of events. You know, the number in the series will depend on how many people actually want to show off their MRE that they did for their final project at the end. I kind of break it in and open it up and have it an event for the entire AltSpace community. The idea being you guys would create a world, you know, a small world hopefully, so people would see your MRE pretty quickly. When people enter it, they're there, you can kind of talk them through it, answer any questions about it, and then they go back to a main hub world, which would contain teleporters to all the other worlds. I think that'd be a lot of fun, and have a series of those with however many people, and just have it open to the entire AltSpace community. So, be thinking of final projects. I have a couple ideas for them if you have trouble coming up with ideas. They're basically things I've wanted to do, but have just not found the time to do yet. So. All right, so now I'm going to start talking through the MRE API. This is, again, the developer.altvr.com page again. That bottom right bubble there, it's the complete API documentation. And it's showing, I think, oh, yes, you can see my pointer. It shows the list of enumerations, classes, basically everything you can use to interface to the MRE. I'm going to take one step forward here because this isn't the whole thing. This, as you can see, and I don't expect anybody to be able to read this. Last week I made the joke that there's going to be a test at the end of the day, but I don't fall for that this time anyway. But this is the complete list of the basic interfaces. This is the globals that are available in there, and you see this sliding bars for this one. It's about halfway down. So there's actually significantly more there as well. It's pretty big, which makes it very difficult to digest, and it's not organized really well. It's great. It's a great organization for a reference, what I call a reference. In other words, you know about what you want to do, you can go find something. But to me, when you're looking for documentation, there's a big difference between a primer, you know, what you need to learn to use something, and a reference, which is, you know, the basics and just want to look something up. So this is really more of a reference. To kind of get closer to that second one, what I've gone through is, and this is completely Argon's view of the world here as a warning, other people may look at this and kind of disagree with how I've categorized some of these things. And I'd be interested in hearing any ideas people have on this. But I wanted to break it up into more digestible chunks, if that makes sense. So kind of group them together. So you see here, we've got users, actors, what I call the game engine. I have Unity in parentheses, and the number of items in each of those. So if you're looking for something related to a user, and we'll talk about what a user is in a second, there are really basically 8 items you need to look for. Something related to interfacing with the game engine, and again, Unity. For us, it's Unity. Design, develop the MRE. They wanted to do it in a way that it wasn't necessarily tied to alt space. They wanted it to be able to be reused in a wide variety of situations. So this, the Unity here I have in parentheses because that's what we use here, but it does support the Unreal Game Engine for those of you familiar with that, or it could support it. It could support an augmented reality mode, you know, where you don't necessarily have a world you're in and it just spawns an object inside it, that type of thing. And that's really one of the major design decisions that it's kind of limited what we can do to some extent, but it kind of broadens it in other areas if other areas have adopted MREs. Today, AltSpace is the only group that uses MREs, but again, they wanted to leave it open. The animation one I have here, with the 14 items there are related to building an animation inside the MRE. You can actually define the path an animation is going to take, define the change and things like that programmatically inside an MRE, and that's what those are related to. And the last one is interactivity. That's kind of interfacing with the user, really making things work back and forth. It's where the buttons you can interface with are, for instance, it's where you can set up little boxes that when a user enters, or when an actor enters, I should say, we'll talk about those in a minute, you can make something happen. So that's really a part of the fun interactivity part. That's, for instance, I'm sure everybody's seen the Helmets API. It gives you a button you can click on, and when you click on the button, it attaches something to you, like a hat or something like that. The button there is in that interactivity area. The 2 green ones at the bottom are the areas we're not going to really delve into those into a lot of in this course in particular. The sport is just kind of a catch-all. It's some data items that are really related to multiple ones of those blue items at the top. That's where things like vectors are, things like that. It's just really kind of across a variety of these things. The MRE external interface, just wanted to note that it's there. We won't be talking to that in the class. It's really getting into more advanced topics. But that's really getting into if you want to customize when somebody connects to you, maybe you want to say, well, I don't want to talk to that person. So have your MRE reject that connection. That's where those type of things would come into play. But we're not going to get into that at all in this course. That's a pretty advanced topic. Plus, I haven't looked at it at all. So it's be difficult for me to talk much about it. So. All right, so this is, you guys, I know, probably can't read this, but the categories I made and what I've done, it's the link at the screen at the bottom. This is a Google Sheet. This is a shortcut to that Google Sheet. So what I'm going to do here is exit out and switch to this. Unfortunately, with Google Sheets, I cannot quite figure out how to get rid of the stuff at the top and so on, and present just the sheet. But this is basically what that is. It's available to everybody here. I've shared it, and again, like the previous class, I'm going to post all these links in that Discord channel at the end of the day, and the slides will be available, so you'll see it there. But what I've done here is these are the basic types I've talked about it here. You know, the user, the actor, the game engine, Unity, and so on. And these are the items from that developer API that are related to it. So for instance, if you wanted to find something about the user here, if you hover over user, not that one, hover over user here, it brings up a pop-up here. And these are actually hot links. So you can click on this and it takes you right to that page in the Unity API documentation itself. So this helps you navigate that API as well, in addition to once you find where everything is. So a lot of what we'll be doing is going through these various things for the rest of the class. And again, this entire one's going to be available. And I'm very interested in any feedback people have on it too. As you gain experience with MREs, if you say, like, I think user filter should be an actor, I'll probably disagree with that one. User filter is probably clearly user. But if you think something's in the wrong spot, I'd be very interested in that. And we can definitely talk towards that. There are a few of these, like this attachment that I have in parentheses. What you'll see there is it's something, it's in user, but it's primarily an actor. So there's something that appears in both. There aren't many of those parentheses ones, but just a couple of them. And the attachment is, you can probably guess, it's the attachment that you can put up, the hat that you can stick on your head, for instance. And of course, you attach it to a user, and that's why I have it in the user one as well. All right, switching back to the screen here. All right, so going forward, today we're going to be talking about users and actors a little more. We're going to concentrate on those exclusively for today. So a user, that's pretty simple. It's us, basically. You know, all of us in here are users. We have avatars. One of the catches is the MRE can do very little to a user. The basic idea, if you think about it, is, you know, we use the MRE, so we interact with the MRE to get it to do things. The MRE doesn't control us, we control the MRE, is basically the functionality of it. So it makes some sense of that. It is a somewhat disappointing limitation, the last bullet there, users are not actors. I'll get to that in a minute. Some of that can be a bit of a limitation that you kind of wish you could get into a bit more control, but the actors are basically all the items that are not users inside of a world. All your kit items are actors. That little camera in front of me that's part of the template, that would be an actor if it was brought in as a kit item. The web projector and the web projector mirrors, those are all actors. It's basically something that you can bring in from an MRE. And you see there are multiple ways to create it that I have listed here. One is via a kit item. If you put an item in a kit, you can get its ID and bring it in via an MRE pretty easily. If the item's animated, that item will just start animating automatically. It doesn't have to be a static, boring item. It can actually be pretty involved. It can play a sound, for instance, things like that. So there's a lot you can do with that one in particular. It can be a GLTF that's hosted pretty much anywhere on the internet. You can provide a link to the GLTF and bring it down. And one thing that not a lot of people realize is that Allspace actually provides an area for where you can upload your own GLTS and just link to it. You don't have to find your own service to host those. And then the last one are primitives that are built inside the MRE programmatically. So you think about the geometrics, it's those type of things, the geometric kit items. But you don't necessarily have to go to a kit item and bring it in. You can say, bring in a cube and add this material to it, and this material has such and such a texture and things like that. But it's for pretty basic stuff. You can bring it in. It's pretty powerful for the shapes it provides, but it's a fairly limited set of shapes. And then again, users, the MRE has significant control over the actors. You can move them around. You can adjust their size. You can adjust the material that's on them. You can animate them, all sorts of stuff like that. One of the things that a lot of us try to do when we get started is try to work with the user's avatar like it's an actor, right? It's something in the world that you kind of want to interact with. And one thing an idea I've had for a while, and somebody else has talked to me about it, was it'd be kind of cool to have an Alice in Wonderland world where maybe you drink something and then your avatar shrinks. Unfortunately, you can't really do that. You could do the reverse and have the entire world grow, but that happens for everybody in the world, of course, potentially. So there are limitations there that would be nice. And of course, as you try to maybe move users around, being able to move them would be nice as well. So there are all sorts of things that it might be nice to do, but they took the position that users control the MREs, not vice versa. So there's limited interaction with that, but it probably provides a lot of safety too from some things that could be pretty annoying to people. All right, so now we're going to get into kind of the I think start with one that's already there, just edit it. That's what I do the vast majority of the time. This is from the Hello World example. What I'll do a lot is just bring in that Hello World example, kind of delete that app.tss that's in there and create the my own, or edit the one that's in there possibly. That's pretty common. I think really that's the way most people work. So in spite of all these files, though, there are really just a few you care about. And here, there are two directories you care about, source directory and the public directory. The source is where all your TypeScript files go. When you create your program files, that's where you're going to stick them. Now, the Hello World example, one of the things it does, if you've looked through it a little bit, is it will bring in a GLTF, that is that Hello World cube. Where they store that is in that public directory. That public directory are the files that are shared. It works kind of like a web server. If you want to download something, have it available somewhere on the internet that the MRE can access, you can put it in that public one, and they'll be able to access it there. You don't have to have it from there. You can host it on some other web server yourself if you want. Or like I said, Altspace kind of provides an area to do something like that for the GLTF. They actually have a textures. I don't know if anybody's noticed that you can put texture type items up there and things like that. So they kind of provide some way of hosting that on their own as well. But as I've learned there, I kind of like to use them myself. So looking inside that source directory, you'll see two TypeScript files. One is called app.ts, and that's where the vast majority of your code goes. And server.ts is the other one. Server.ts, that's most of the boilerplate, and that's really the one that takes care of interfacing to the Altspace client itself. So they kind of hide that from you. Again, it's mostly boilerplate. That second one I intentionally crossed out. One thing we've learned over the last week is that there was an update to the MRE library. I think it came when 0.20 came out, that you actually do not need to mess with that base URL anymore. By default, it will work on both that private interface, that 127.0.0.1, and a LAN interface. If you have multiple network cards, it potentially would work across all of them. Now, one thing I will say, you do want to be a little careful with that. If you're on your home LAN, behind a firewall between you and the internet, you're fine. If you're working on a server that has internet access, it can be it could be a problem if you think you're not sharing something on the internet but actually are. So I do want to make sure people know that, and that message that's displayed kind of gives you an impression that it's not shared on the internet when it actually is. So I'm actually going to mention that to the Altspace crew and see if they'll update that message, because it's a little misleading currently. And again, could cause some problems with you sharing data that you didn't really mean to. In particular, anything in that public directory that I mentioned that you might stick there, it's shared with the internet if you are on a public server. So keep that in mind. So again, that app.ts, most of your code goes there, and server.ts calls app.ts as from its boilerplate code as people come in. All right, so this is from last week, or actually 2 weeks ago. I didn't change the message here. This is this little diagram here. It was as I was talking about how the Altspace server itself interfaces with the user, and the MRE server interfaces with the user, and then the app interfaces with the server. I just wanted to kind of bring home that we really are kind of talking about the same things we talked about a couple of weeks ago. The server and the app are really basically the same thing. The app is exactly the same thing. The server that I have in the bubble over here is actually a little bit more than server.ts. It includes a little bit more boilerplate. Conceptually, it's basically the same thing. So this next line, what I'm going to do is really kind of work through these little lines here and specify what happens there a little more in kind of a standard use case. So, all right, so this is kind of what I call a typical MRE flow. For those of you who are familiar with these type of diagrams, they're called activity diagrams. I'm going to call the little stickmen users because that's the Altspace term. I know that's not the typical activity diagram term, but I think it'd be confusing there. So just kind of bear with me. I'm going to call them users here. But you see the users here are the same ones as the users on the previous page. And then this is the Altspace server, the MRE server, and the MRE app. So it's those same basic items we've been talking about. And what this does is kind of talk about, as people come into the world, exit the world, the messaging that goes back and forth to kind of give you a better idea of the control flow that happens as people enter the world and exit the world. So we're going to start here, and I picked on Scourge. It's the second user coming and going. So I think he knows that because he saw it last week, so he's not too offended, or at least he didn't say anything if he was. But, so anyway, we've got start out and Dargon entering the world. The way to read these vertical lines are kind of time, and as it goes down, time is increasing. The screen is, of course, horizontal. These tend to be vertical. Really, the way to think is this thing off to the right here is really underneath the one here. We're going to go down this one and go down this one, but it's really kind of a continuous flow. So Dargon, this is kind of Dargon's timeline, Scourge's timeline, and this timeline for the other items we've talked about here. The other thing to notice here is whether it's a dotted line or these little fat lines. When it's a fat line, it's actually running. The dotted line is just kind of a line that kind of connects the user. As it gets fat is when the thing kind of is created, or as it's actually actively running. So the first thing to notice here is that the AltSpace server and the MRE server, they're running to start. They're kind of always running, right? You don't have to call up AltSpace and say, hey, I'm about to run AltSpace, so I need you to start up your servers. They're running all the time. The MRE server, that's got to be running all the time too. The server itself does. And so you actually have to start the MRE, leave it running all the time in order for it to be available to users. And that's why you have to deploy it on a server somewhere, and one that has access to the internet, and one that you can have a program running and then log out of it and have it keep running. So Dargon here, he starts up, he decides he wants to enter a particular world in AltSpace. So he sends the AltSpace server, hey, I'm going to enter a world. So the dotted lines here, those are reactions to the line above it. So after Dargon, oops, sorry, didn't mean to go there. After Dargon enters the world, the AltSpace server sends back all the world data. So for instance, if it was this event world, it would send back the template that we're using here. It would send back all the kit items that I've added. For instance, the web projector, the various items there. It would send back information to everybody's headset, or, we're in 2D mode. The servers we got there, all that data goes back to Dargon's, we'll call it a headset going forward here. And also as part of that, the URL, basically the website address of the MRE server itself, so it knows how, so Dargon knows how to connect to that MRE server. And so that's the next thing he does here. He sends this he uses that server URL, connect to the MRE server, and sends a connect message to it. So at that point, the MRE server starts talking to the app itself. You notice the app is not running yet. So our Dargon connects to the MRE server. Part of that is saying, hey, I want to run that particular app. So at that point, the MRE server does what's called, it constructs the app. And that's when the app line goes fat. So that's when it's created. Once the app's created, the MRE sends a message to the app. Hey, I'm ready to go. I've started, so you should be ready to go. So the MRE app, at that point, it can do anything that it needs to say, okay, I need to initialize something and get things started. If you want an item to always exist when a user enters a world, you do it in the started area, because that happens as the app first starts up. Then user joined, then it sends a message to the server saying Dargon joined. And so the MRE app can say whatever it needs to do. It can note that Dargon's joined, do anything specific to Dargon, and so on. For those of you that were here last week, a little preview, when we added all those mules, horses, whatever they were, to everybody, we did that on that user joined event because each individual person needed a mule. So as the user joined, the app created a mule and attached it to the user. That's how that ended up working. So, all right, so the app just keeps on running there and just waits for other messages from the MRE server. So at that point, Scourge decides to enter the world. So Scourge starts up his headset, and then he enters a world. So he sends, just like before up here, he sends that enter world message to the AltSpace server. The AltSpace server sends back the same world data it sent to Dargon and sends back the MRE URL as well. So then Scourge's headset knows to connect to that particular server as well. So he sends that connect message to the MRE server here. At that point, the MRE server, before, if you remember, it ran that construct and started. But the MRE, or the app here is already running. The server knows that, so it doesn't need to do that. So for the second user joining, this construct and this started message do not get sent. So when you're creating your app, one way to think about this is this construct and started message are going to be sent once as the app starts up. It's not going to be sent for each user. This user join, though, with the user Scourge here, is what's sent each time somebody's joined. And in this case, it lets it know that Scourge joined. And in the case of our mule app, it creates the mule specifically for Scourge, and then attached it to him. All right, so Dargon and Scourge enjoy whatever world they happen to be in. And a little later, Dargon gets bored and decides he wants to leave the world and leave AltSpace entirely in this example. So as he's leaving the world, he's going to send a disconnect message to the MRE server. Remember, Dargon and Scourge are talking to the server. They're not talking to the app at all. Everything goes through that server. So once the server receives that message, it says, okay, well, Dargon's leaving, so I better let the app know. The app is going to send a user left message, or excuse me, the server is going to send a user left message saying, hey, Dargon in particular is leaving the app. So the app is going to do whatever it needs to do for that. I've kind of said clean up Dargon here, which cleaning up after me is, so I'm glad to have some computerized help. So it's going to clean up for Dargon. In the case of the mules, for instance, if I had left when the mules were there, it would need to delete that mule object, disconnect it from Dargon and delete that mule object so it wouldn't just be laying around. So those are the types of things he would do in there. And then Dargon would send a leave message world to the AltSpace VR server. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed when you leave a world, all the MRE objects disappear before you leave the world. In fact, the MRE objects disappear pretty quickly, basically immediately. And that's because that disconnect occurs very quickly, and then the leave world doesn't actually occur until later. So a little later on, maybe Scourge is getting lonely, he decides it's not worth hanging around all there by himself. So he decides he's going to disconnect. He's going to send that disconnect message to the MRE server as well. The server is going to send a message to the app at the user left message saying that Scourge is disconnected. The app is going to say, okay, I need to clean up after Scourge. This little box over here, that's just a note. The app is going to notice that there are no users remaining and then say, okay, I can exit now. So you see it goes back to this little dotted line. The app exits, sends the exit message to the server. The server notices it's done. So at that point, you'll see Dargon's gone. He's down to a dotted line. Scourge is gone. Oh, well, and then Scourge leaves the world, of course. Scourge is gone. He's down to a dotted line. And the app is gone. It's down to a dotted line. But the server, the AltSpace server and the MRE server are still there. So they're still running and everything, ready for the next person to come along. All right, so that was a lot to walk through. I guess I will ask, I've seen a few messages in my Discord channel that maybe there's a green screen. Are people seeing it? Could you give me hearts if you can see it? Sad face if you cannot. Okay, I'm seeing, okay, it's looking like maybe World 2 is not seeing it. So I'm going to attempt to bring it back here. I'm going to disconnect, or at least stop broadcasting, and then start broadcasting again. You give me hearts if you can see it. Still seeing a bunch of sad faces. Okay, I'm going to try looking at that again. Anything now? All right, still a bunch of sad faces. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the next slide, even though you can't see it. Although all it says is, are there any questions right now? So I'm going to open the host panel for questions and work on getting that back maybe afterwards. So I'm going to turn on allow hand raises and see if there are any questions on what you guys have just seen. Okay, I see Pranav. You should be on air.
Hello.
Hello, I
Audible?
can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, sorry, excuse for my accent. I'm from India. Okay, so I have a question. As you have shown, there are the MRE server and the MRE app are running separately. Okay, so do I need to call any RPC to sync the action between across the user? Like if I'm performing any action onto the MRE, like in Hello World, when I click onto the cube, it rotates. So do I need to call any RPC to sync that action across all users so all should see that it's rotating?
No, you don't have to do any of that yourself. That's all hidden inside the library. So you end up just the server knows when to send a particular message, and it's by the time your app receives the event, it's already been encapsulated into a function call. So that's all transparent to you.
Okay. All right, that's it.
Right, great. Thank you very much. All right. Let's see, Lindsay, you're up next. You should be on air.
Oh, hiya, can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it was just in terms of when you were talking about the user leaving the world and then destroying any of the objects. I was just, sort of objects that are kind of attached to users, are they kind of automatically destroyed? I mean, what sort of things do we have to take into consideration or do we need to do any of that sort of garbage disposal, or is some of it done automatically?
Yeah, basically, near as I can tell, you need to delete everything yourself. Unfortunately, I would have expected it to disappear myself, which I think is where your question's coming from. But unfortunately, if the person is attached to goes away, the object just snaps to 000 in the world. So it's still hanging around. So basically what you end up doing is, and we'll get to this a little bit later, not today, but you end up just having to store all the associations between users and anything attached to them in a structure of some sort. A map is what tends to be used. All right. All right. So let's see, Mark J. Should be on air.
Hi. Just to state that you managed to turn your screen into green screen for room 1, as well as whatever was going on in room 2. But that wasn't my question. The question was, from your description of the architecture there, can the MRE app act on anything in the Ultra server, i.e.
Unfortunately,
the
no.
world that you're in?
Right. Unfortunately, no. The MRE app itself, it has some remedial physics, so it won't fall through the floor if you make it grabbable. That's one of the things you can do with it and drop it. It won't, at least it won't always fall through the floor, and things like that. But it just does not interface with the world. I don't know if you've seen some of the discussion I've been having on the Discord channel, but in a lot of ways, it's really, you've got the Altspace world running and you've got the MRE world running, or the MRE running, and they barely know about each other. They're just kind of overlaid on top of each other in your headset.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you for the question. And yeah, I'll work on the green screen when we're done with the questions here. Hopefully we'll be able to get that back going again. So. All right, and Holger, you should be on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So if I have now this MRE running on my server, and the user connects to the users are connecting to it, are they all connecting to the same instance of the MRE, or are these all separate instances on the server?
On the server, the answer to the question you're asking is probably that they're all the same. There is a nuance to it. When you bring in the kit item in AltSpace, if you remember, there's a little string there that looks like a bunch of gobbledygook. The session ID. There is an instance of the app created for each session ID, and that's how it keeps track of which world people are in. And everybody who's in the same world is talking to the same app instance, unless you bring in two versions of it and have two instance IDs, for instance, that type of thing.
So if I would, for instance, run an animation in the then I could theoretically synchronize those users to this animation which runs on my server.
You could bring in the animation and have it halted, and then when everybody's ready, maybe push a button or something, you could programmatically have it start at that point, and they would be synchronized within a second or so, right? So.
Or could I also say, like, I make certain time markers where the object is at a certain position, and then sends the user this information and positions the object.
Oh, that's interesting. I've not thought along those lines and have not looked into that, but that's a really interesting idea. It would be in that set of animation groups that I talked about, which we're not really going to get into in detail today. But if you wanted to look at it a little bit, it would be in that grouping.
This idea of making like a Ferris wheel where the users jump into. So, and if I would make it now normally in Unity, then the users would, of course, like, some would be just in between the, how you call these things, these little carts, which are these gondolas, yeah. And if I would say, like, okay, the after so many seconds, it starts over again, then I would be theoretically be able to place those people right into those little gondolas, right?
You could, yeah, and I think you could get something like that to work. You definitely need to do the coding to start and stop it at appropriate times, because you can stop an MRE as well, and that's probably the best way to do it. That's a really good idea. I like that a lot.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, I think that's all the questions. Anybody else have any? All right, and a second, I'll turn off the participation temporarily. And thank you, Dragoness. We're going to try again and see if we can get this going. That's not going to work. All right, yeah, we were trying something here to get it going. So what I'm going to do here. So Dragoness, if you could do what you did again and take over the screen temporarily. This is a system we worked out to get control back last time. Yes. Good. So, all right. So if you could turn that off, please. I'm trying something a little different here. Start sharing again. Give me a second here. How's that working? Yes, all right. Well, I'm seeing a mixture of them. I'm seeing, oh no, they're happy faces, I'm sorry. I was seeing the faces and thinking they were sad faces. Okay, all right, thanks. All right, well, great. Thank you, everybody. Glad it's working. So looks like we've got a good workaround. thank you so much, Dragoness, for taking that on, and we got the system now for working around yet another bug in alt space. So, all right. So next thing here, can you guys? There it goes. It was a little delayed. I can see it on my screen here, and then I'm looking at it in alt space as well, and there was a bit of a delay here. So, all right. So this is what I'm calling a better hello world. It's a sample that I ran last week. You guys kind of saw it run if you were here last week. But this is the basic code here. I know this is probably a bit small for you to see. I'm going to switch in a minute here, but I'm going to talk to kind of what's on the right here and talk to why I created it right now. The Hello World application that AltSpace provides, it's a good demo. I don't want to, or a good sample. I don't want to just, poo-poo it, slam it too much. But it's Hello World, for those of you who have been into coding for a while. The intent of a Hello World program is it's a real basic introductory program. It shouldn't do much. It's got basically the skeleton to get things started, basically the minimum you need to actually get something and have something interesting going. This is the entirety of my code. I don't know if you've ever looked at the AltSpace Hello World code, but it loads a GLF, it loads an animation, it creates a text item internally, it parents the text item to the animation or to the box and starts things going, and then it has buttons to happen when things turn. And that's just way too complicated for what's supposed to be, hey, here's your very first code to look at. So that's kind of why I created this one. So since our screen is actually working, fortunately, what I'm going to do is switch to this. This is it in my code here. Should be easier for you to see now. Can't get the whole thing on the screen, of course, when it's bigger, but still it's going to be useful. And I hope that's big enough. Is that big enough? Do I need to embiggen it even more? Okay, I'm getting smiley faces. So we're going to go from here. All right, so I'm just going to kind of walk through this, and this looks like the last thing we'll be able to get through today, looking at the time here. So we'll just pick up the other slides later on. But so what we've got here, this first line here, you're going to have it or something very similar to it in each of your apps. So this is, I guess we should say, the app.ts, which is, again, where all your code goes. This is basically importing the AltSpace SDK. So it's import star as MRE. That's basically star is everything. As MRE, as you see down here, I have MRE.actor, MRE.asset container. That's where that MRE name there is coming from here. If you wanted to call it Fred, you could change this MRE to Fred, and then all these MREs down here would be Fred. It would get a little confusing. I recommend keeping it MRE. But so you import MRE from, and then this is basically this big long line here is the entire MRE SDK. All the libraries, all the classes, all the global variables, all that are imported inside this little MRE thing here with this line. And the nicest thing about this, and starting from Hello World, is that one's in Hello World, so you never have to actually remember what it is. You can just remember not to delete it, and you'll be good to go, and then basically forget it's there for the most part. All right, so this is a straight comment here that my text editor here I'm using uses green for comments, so that's what you're seeing there. So that's just a little talk here, the main class of this app. You can tell it's the main class, not from the comment, because it's got an export and a default on it. Default means when the server.ts wants to start this particular app, it's going to look for this default class and use it. The export, if you don't export it, then it's not going to be visible to anything outside this particular file here. Since you want it to be visible to the server, you're going to have that export in there. And the other nice bit about using the Hello World example is this line's already in there. Really, the only thing you'd want to change is this Hello World to whatever you want the name of your app to be. I'm using Hello World anyway, so I just left it alone as it is. These next items here, these are what's called the data members of the class. And it's the ones that I want to declare. There are a few other data members in here that I'll talk about when we get to them. I'm going to kind of gloss over them now because we're actually going to use them a little later, but this is just basically saying these two items here, I'm going to want to be able to use at some point in my program. I have one, it's going to be private. That means nothing outside the class can see it. It's It's going to be visible inside the class. You can use it whatever you want here, but it's not really intended for outside this particular class. It's a kit item. That's the name of it. So whenever you see kit item, it's going to be referring to this, and it is this MRE.actor. So it's going to be, spoiler alert, it's going to be a kit item I bring in, and the type of it is this actor. If you remember, I mentioned before, all MREs are actors. This MRE.actor is just a way to get to it. This equal nulls, it's something I like to add, basically because of my experience in other coding languages, is where most of mine were. I will generally not include it since it's that for you by default. But I've worked with too many languages that don't do it and leave it to random data that my fingers just type that in out of habit. All right, this next one, it's another one that you're going to need in all your worlds, basically, or all your MREs, unless they just do not do anything with kit items at all. This assets one, basically you've got to create what's called an asset container and pass it to some functions. The asset container is where a lot of the functions you call are going to store their textures, their materials, things like that. It needs a place to hold all those. You can create ones yourself and store them in there as well. But those really are kind of the Unity assets, the items you see there. If you create a kit item in Unity, those assets that can end up in an asset container as well. If you remember back to that activity diagram, or kind of the basic steps that I went through, one of the items, the first thing that happens is that construct message when the server is starting up the app. What that construct message does when it receives is it calls this constructor function. It's a special function name inside each class that's called as the class is created. It's going to pass it what's called a context. That context, there's not a whole lot you can do looking inside of it. We had a question come up before where I started talking about that session ID. That's stored inside that context. So it's kind of related to which particular instance of an MRE if you're running. If your MRE is in 10 different worlds, you might have 10 different copies of it, but you don't have to pay any attention to that. That variable there, which you're going to pass to some functions because it's required, it's going to be there. And its type is MRE.context. And again, you're always going to have that in your constructor. So it's not something you need to remember too much, but you do need to remember that context parameters there because you are going to need to pass that to some things. This private in front of here, that if you're not used to TypeScript, it kind of looked a little weird to me when I first saw it. It's kind of a shortcut for creating a member. It's another way of doing this would have been private context : MRE.context up here, kind of like this one up here. But this is kind of a short way of doing it for TypeScript. So there is actually another item created, just like kit item and assets, called context when you have that word private there. If you take it off, you're going to need to create another item up there, but most people just leave it there. In the constructor, it's very simple. What you're going to do is call that context parameter. You need it to be created. And then, if you remember, the next thing that happens after the thing is constructed is the server sends a started message to the app. Well, you need to tell the server what do I need, what should it do? What function should it call when it receives that started message? And that's what this is here. So on started, that means when that server receives that started message, you're going to tell it to call a function called started down here, which you see is declared right down here. That's that this dot started corresponds to this function that's being declared down here. So without this line, if the server received that started message, it would just throw it away. It wouldn't know what to do. Even though you have a function called started, it would not necessarily call that function. So it's very important in the constructor to call that, because that's really about the only way to get that started message. Unless you just absolutely don't need one, you're going to need to call that there. This is kind of a funny syntax if you haven't seen what I call Lambda functions. That's not the TypeScript or JavaScript name for it. I can't remember what the exact name for it here, but it's basically you're declaring a function here without this really short one in line here. These first parentheses here, you can think of as these parentheses. It says it takes no parameters. And then this points to here is basically this curly brace. And it's just a single line here, this dot started. So you're saying, well, when you get the started message, call the function this dot started. All right, so that brings us down to this started message here. So when that started message comes in, this one gets called. And one of the things you're going to need to do there is create that asset container, which if you remember, I declared up here. So that one, this dot assets, which is that function I created, it's pretty straightforward. You call a new MRE.asset container. That's one of the classes that's just always there. And again, this is something you're always going to want to do. It's somewhat boilerplate. Just remember not to delete it to a large extent. But you notice you're passing it the context. If you remember, that context kind of tells you which instance of that MRE you're running, so which world it's in. You're going to need an asset container for each of one of the worlds you're in, and that's why it needs that context. Again, that's boilerplate. Really, you just need to remember not to delete it, not to delete that parameter. If you do, it's going to give you an error message anyway. And then here we get the one and single unique line I added to this to actually get things started, this kit item here. So everything else, if you remember what I've talked about, is basically boilerplate. So this is the one single line I added to the boilerplate to get this hello world thing to run. So it's this .kit item, which is how we're going to refer to this kit item object. After it's declared inside this function, you're always going to have this in front of it. And that basically means this instance of the object. It's just always going to be there. It's probably the easiest way to remember it. So this .kit item equals, got an MRE. It's an actor, right? Remember, the kit items are actors. And we call this function called create from library. So create from library means basically create a kit item. They call it a library. And I think they call it a library to kind of keep it independent of alt space. If you remember, I said they don't want to tie this too closely to alt space. They want, VR chat to be able to potentially use it at some point, and they might not call them kit items. So create from library, which in our case in alt space here is create from a kit item. We've got this .context. That's the context we saved up at the top. That's if you got it, it's always going to be there. And basically, you're telling it what world to create the item in. Then you have this open curly brace. That's how you're going to pass parameters to it. You have this resource ID here, and then this artifact ID and this big crazy number that nobody has any idea what it is unless you've done something like this before. But that's really it for creating a kit item. It's a resource ID. There are multiple ways of doing it, and we'll talk to more advanced ways of creating it later on. But in the basic form, create the resource. It's an artifact, and this is what's called an artifact ID. And I'll talk to how to get to that in a second here. And that is the end of the file. So that's the one and single item created there. So when that's created, it's going to actually create the item. If you look off to your left here, and I started this one last week, but I'm going to go ahead and start it here again. That kit item with that magic number there. Let's look at the right here. What I'm going to do for the MRE you're seeing off to your left, my right here, is start it up and start that MRE, and it's going to create that kit item for you. So what I've done here, I'm hoping this is still running good. It is. This is the server that MRE is connected to. That I have the MRE. I've already uploaded it and everything, so I'm not going to show you all that. So I've already created it, so I'm just going to do npm start, and I hope that's clear enough for you to read up there. And it's going to do its thing. We'll eventually print a message saying it started. Let it go here. And then once it's ready, there it goes. What we're doing is constantly pulling for that one. There it goes. And it brought in that kit item. And you see that kit item doesn't have to be just a box. It can be something pretty fancy there. I created that in Tilt Brush, brought it in, created a kit item for it, and you can just bring in whatever type of thing you want. Again, if it was animation, it would have started the animation and so on, and everything is running. And then when I stop this MRE over here, it'll disappear. It's created. Unfortunately, you cannot create an item and leave it in the world. I really wish you could do that, but they don't provide for that. When you stop the server and, of course, the app itself, it's going to delete all items that were not in there. All right, so that's the basics of it. I'm going to really quickly here show you where to get, well, actually, I have a screen for that. I was going to show you where to get that resource ID. So that's that. Where did that weird number come from? And really, if you go into Altspace, log into your account, this kit item you've created, you can get to it from here. You go to the more, you go to the kits from there, select the kit you want. I created one specifically for this class so I could find it. And it's when you scroll down to the bottom there, you'll see all your artifacts. And this magic number here is the one I entered over here. I didn't know you can't see this other one large enough to see it's the same one, but it is. I just did a copy from clipboard there, and pasted it in over there. I had to type in that artifact ID : but then that number just came in. And that's how you pick the one there. If, say, somebody else wants to give you permission to create one of their kit items, what you can do, they can just give you that kit ID, that item, or excuse me, the artifact ID. They don't have to even give you the kit name or anything like that. Just that artifact ID. You can put it in your MRE and pop it up. So it doesn't have to be in your kit. All you really need is that ID. So, all right, with that, I'm going to open the floor for questions again here. Bring up the host panel. Do the allow hand raises. And see if anybody has any questions. All right, Reborn Bab. Oh, he disappeared on me. I don't know if I accidentally did that or not, but kind of raise your hand if you want to. Okay, you're back. I'll put you on megaphone. Reborn Bab, you should be good.
Yes. I had a question. So all you have to do pretty much is just make sure. I'm trying to see, because all these letters up here, numbers, is confusing me. But it appears that all you would need to have is the MRE equals and pretty much that kit number.
Right, okay, so yeah, let me bring up the code here. I think that's what you're talking about, right? This area?
Yes.
Right, so that number right there is that number that it just showed you how to walk through to get on the slide. So that, yeah, that's all you need. And then the rest of it is this function call that, again, create from library means create a kit item, in Altspace at least. And you always pass it the context. Then you basically add this code. Resource ID, that
right,
little thing before the colon always stays the same.
So is there a way like to add multiple items to the one kit or one thing?
You could, well, depending on what you're asking. I could, for instance, if I wanted another one of these, I could just copy this code and create another one here. See if I copied what I needed to. And then change this artifact ID and bring something else in. Is that what you were asking?
Yes, like say I wanted a whole list, a row of different types of, like say that the tutus that they got and stuff, how it's just a whole row of different kinds. Do they have to have multiple numbers for that?
They do. Yeah, each one has its own unique number. So they created a unique kit item for each one and brought those in that way. So,
and they kept adding, copy, paste, and adding a new number, copy, paste, and adding a new number.
Now what they probably did was, because that one in particular, if it's the one I'm thinking of, they actually kind of read a set of them from another file. That way they can change what's there, add another one later or so on without having to edit their MRE code. And then do what's called a for loop, which basically loops, but they had to call this function that many times. They didn't necessarily have multiple copies and pastes. They might have told the program to loop and create it that way.
Okay, are they using the same number for any artifact? Or I mean, like spun, copy, they would use those specific words.
Yes,
And
it'd
just
always be
change
resource
the.
ID. Right. It'd always be resource ID. It'd always be artifact. Again, assuming they're doing kit items. And then always the number there would be the only thing they change.
Right. Okay.
Now let me modify that a little bit. This is the simplest form of this. You can tell it to say resize the object, make it bigger, smaller, and they may be doing some of that in addition to this. But I wanted to keep this one, just as simple as it could be.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Thank
you very
you.
much, Reborn. Thank you very much, Reborn. Okay. Pranav should be on.
Yeah. So I want to know, can I have multiple animations inside of a kit? And can I trigger those on any interaction like click off on a button or click off that object?
So now kit items and animations are a unfortunate space. When you bring in an animation as a kit item, it's going to automatically start. Now there are other ways, if you remember, you can bring in GLTFs I mentioned earlier. When you bring it in as a GLTF, you have more control over when things start and stop. So you could bring in a GLTF, multiple animations on the same object, and get to each individual one and start and stop it, if that's what you're asking.
Yes, and I tried same thing. Okay, so I will tell you what I was doing. I wanted to show a mechanical animation. Okay, a robotic arm is picking up a box. Okay, so that should
Cool.
happen on a first click, and onto the second click, it should keep that box on conveyor belt and it should move forward. Okay, so as it's a mechanical model, the models are not boned. Okay, so in GLTF, I'm seeing different animation clip for each part. Okay, so for mechanical arm, it has divided into 4 different parts. So for each part, it has a separate clip. So there are around 15 to 20 clips for this simple animation. Okay, but how should I handle this? Do I need to?
So
Yeah.
So it's a single animation though?
Yes, it's single animation, but I'm seeing around 15 different clips. It shows each clip plays only one component in only one part of that particular model.
Okay. So you're saying clip. I'm sorry. I think I may have misunderstood you. I thought you were saying click with a k sound at the end before, and thinking of you
Sorry.
hitting buttons to start it. So yeah, I'm sorry. But yeah, so it's you start the animation by name, and then everything inside of it will start the same way it would in Unity.
Okay, maybe I was not able to explain the question correctly. Okay, this issue is specifically because of the mechanical animation. Okay, as it's not a boned animation. Okay, it does not have a rig. Okay, so like if I want to move a mechanical arm. Okay, so if I'm starting the animation, I'm just moving the first part of that mechanical arm. It's not moving the entire arm. It's just moving one component of it. And if I want to move all the objects, so there are 5 different clips. Okay, so if I'm having a boned animation, it will show me only one clip. If I'm not having that boned animation, showing me 5 different clips. So how do I handle this? How do I sync between them?
So unfortunately, I haven't done a whole lot with animations myself. And it sounds like you've done an animation more advanced than I have. I do know the API itself, you do not get into individual clips. You simply start the animation. So if Are they all, well, maybe we can talk a little later. Maybe we can, I know somebody in particular that's got a lot more experience with animations than I do. And maybe the three of us could get together and kind of figure out what goes on there, because unfortunately you're beyond me on the animation section of it. So.
All right, thank you. I can post you this onto Discord later.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I'd love to hear the conversation on that and participate in it too. So thanks.
Thank you.
All right, you are on. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Yes, you did pronounce it correctly. It's on. Thank you so much for this series. It's very incredible, and I feel really grateful. You're doing a great job so far. Can't wait for the rest. I wanted to ask about the scope. I suspect this probably won't be covered by the series, in which case I will probably follow up on Discord and try and find somebody who can advise me. But just in case, I'm interested in creating an MRE that can send information back to the server. For my case in particular, I want to create a quiz and then send the results of somebody completing that quiz back to my server. But you could use that for like just a feedback form or collecting names or responses in some other way. Will you be covering sending information back to the server / do you know if that's even possible?
Well, to the AltSpace server, the AltSpace server itself, I'll say it's not possible. Now, if you have another server of your own running somewhere, you can certainly talk to that. Another thing you could do, if it's like data stored via the web interface, you could automate, getting to the particular web page. Get the URL if you're familiar with gets and puts and things like that. And that one you can do that. Basically, anything you can do from TypeScript, you can do in one of these. And it's really made for database storage. So you could store the results in a database and then have another way of accessing it via a web page you provide, for instance, or something like that. Make sense? You went off air, so turn it back on. Did that make sense? Did that address your question?
So basically what you're saying is it is possible. It's not something you plan on covering, but if I look deeper into the details of database storage with TypeScript, and I have my own server, that should be more than possible.
Right, yeah, definitely. That's right.
Cool, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, and then Cheddars.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Cool. So is default in TypeScript the same as main as the first question? Like, main in a lot of other programming languages?
Well, default is a class attribute.
Okay.
So the default class, the constructor inside there, basically becomes a main.
Because so you define the class as default as well on top of the constructor.
Right.
Okay. And then my second question was, like, I noticed that with DJ Zellen's piano, that he had to create each piano key with like a sleep function. Is there a limit, or like if you call too many kit spawn objects, or that function that spawns objects, if you call it too many times, does it cause people to crash or anything like that? I was just curious.
I haven't called it enough times to do that. I haven't created a ton of things in a loop. There are ways in TypeScript that we will talk about in not next class, but if I remember, at the one after, help with that. TypeScript is made to be a web server, so it has ways to perform functions asynchronously. So that would be the best way around that. Just not batch them all into a single call. I kind of call them in a loop and queue up the next one as one finishes asynchronously.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, not a problem. All right, any other questions? I'm not seeing any other hand raises. All right. Well, it looks like it. Thank you very much for coming to the second class, and I'm glad we worked around the problem. Thanks very much again to Dragonette for the save in the middle of it. Looking forward to the one next week, and I will unmute all, and thanks everybody for attending. Oh, and I'm sorry, I should say, I forgot to do this last week too. I do want to thank all the mods. They've been a huge help. This is the first time I've really done a multi-room thing, and you guys aren't hearing the beeps this time, fortunately, but those little beeps you were hearing the first time quite a bit was they're chatting back and forth, making sure everything's working in Discord, and I kind of see their messages. If something I need to see, like the green screen issue comes up, I see that. So could not do it with without all these wonderful mods. So thank you so much for that. And thanks again, everybody.